All right, ready for a deep dive. Today, we're tackling a big one. Theological anthropology.
Basically, what does it mean to be human?
Exactly. And we're going deep into some fascinating insights from a lecture series on what the Bible has to say about all of this.
A question that's intrigued thinkers for centuries. These lectures offer a really unique perspective, rooted in Christian tradition.
And you know how much we love a good tradition around here, but really, what's more fundamental than exploring our own origin story, right? Where do we fit into the grand scheme of things?
Absolutely. And one of the things that struck me most in these lectures is how they tie our identity to this concept of being image bearers of God.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. One of the first things that jumped out at me was this idea that we're not just physical bodies, we're also souls. What's the significance of that?
It's huge, E. I mean, that duality, having both a physical and a spiritual nature, speaks volumes about our inherent value and dignity.
So it's about more than just our physical existence.
Way more. The lectures actually connect this idea of having a soul to the concept of moral responsibility. Because we have the spiritual side, we're not just reacting to things on a purely physical level.
Right.
We have this capacity for moral awareness. We can choose.
So is that where the whole made in God's image thing comes in?
Exactly. The lecture uses this really vivid comparison. It says that creation is like a temple filled with images, and all those images are pointing back to God.
I like that.
And we as humans, we're like those images. We reflect something of God's character, God's nature.
Okay, so that makes sense. We're not just physical. We have these souls, and we're reflecting God. But then why even have bodies in the first place if it's all about the soul?
That is where it gets really interesting. These lectures actually emphasize how important our physical existence is to our overall identity.
So it's not one versus the other.
Not at all. They're totally interconnected. It's through our bodies, through our senses, through actually interacting with the world around us, that we experience life, that we learn, that we even develop virtues.
It's like that idea that the lectures talked about how our experiences leave these imprints on our souls. What we do with our bodies, the choices we make, the things we experience, it actually shapes us at a deeper level.
Yes. It emphasizes just how interconnected our physical and spiritual sides truly are. It's not about dismissing the body as unimportant or secondary, but realizing how integral it is to our human experience. We're not meant to just be floating souls, right? We're embodied beings, and that has a profound impact on who we become.
And then there's this other term that I thought was really intriguing. Narrative identity. What in the world is that all about?
I love this concept. Think of it this way. Our lives are like a story, constantly unfolding. We're not static beings.
Right, always changing, always growing.
Exactly. And a key element of that story, of our story, is our relationship with God. The lecture describes it as a covenant, like a sacred agreement with the author of it all.
And you can really see that throughout the Bible, right? Like, the lecture highlighted all these different interactions between God and humanity, from creation to ultimately redemption.
It's this grand narrative.
Yeah, and we're a part of it.
And it's humbling and inspiring, all at the same time. And here's another layer to consider. Families. They play a key role in that grand narrative too. I mean, think about it. God establishes this covenant with Adam, right? And it gets passed down, it gets woven through his family line.
It's like this ripple effect through generations.
Yes. And it's through those families that God's blessings, God's purposes are meant to flow outward into the rest of creation.
Okay, so we've got souls, we've got bodies, we've got these stories unfolding. It's a lot to take in. But then the lectures hit us with this question about creaturely identity versus redeemed identity.
Yeah.
What's the difference? Help me out here.
It's a really important distinction in Christian thought, this idea of creaturely versus redeemed. So think of your creaturely identity as kind of your baseline who you are, simply by virtue of being created.
Okay, so we're starting with the basics.
Exactly. We're made in God's image. That's huge.
Yeah.
But we're also finite, limited.
Flawed, even.
Yeah, prone to messing up. That's part of our creatureliness. But then there's this whole other layer, redeemed identity. And that's where things get really hopeful.
Okay, so redeemed identity, I'm intrigued. How do we tap into that?
Well, the lectures are very clear that redeemed identity comes through our relationship with Christ. It's about being adopted into God's family, being transformed by grace.
It's like we get a second chance.
Exactly. A chance to live out our true identity, the one we were designed for.
And that makes me think about all those stories in the Bible where God calls people by name, often giving them a specific task or purpose. It's like He sees something in them that maybe they don't even see in themselves.
Yes, and he calls them out, right?
Yeah.
Think about Moses. He's just a shepherd, but God sees a leader who can deliver his people.
Right. Or the disciples, these ordinary fishermen who become the foundation of the early church.
It's amazing. God doesn't just see us as we are in this moment. He sees who we can become through his power.
Yeah, so how does all of this line up with how we view identity today? I mean, the lecture touches on this too, and it seems like there might be a bit of a disconnect between the biblical perspective and what we see in modern culture.
Yeah, I'd say there's definitely a clash going on. In fact, the lectures even use the term paganism to describe it.
Okay, so what do they mean by that? Because it seems like that term can be loaded.
Yeah, it can be. But in this context, it's about how we've essentially turned ourselves into our own gods. Like we determine our own reality, our own truth.
Which is kind of the opposite of what we were just talking about, right?
Exactly. If we're created in God's image, if we're designed with a specific purpose in mind, then we're not the ones who ultimately get to decide who we are or what our lives mean.
So how does this difference in worldview actually play out in our lives?
Well, it impacts everything. The lecture talks about how it affects how we approach relationships, how we think about our purpose. And then there are all those hot button issues like gender and sexuality.
Definitely some sensitive topics there.
For sure.
But what I appreciate about these lectures is that they don't get bogged down in those cultural debates. They bring us back to the fundamental question of what it means to be human in the first place.
Yes. It's about looking beyond those ever-changing cultural trends and finding our identity in something deeper, something more enduring.
So not just creating our own identities, but discovering them.
Yes. And we're invited to discover our truest selves in relationship with our Creator.
It's like our identity isn't something we achieve on our own. It's something that's received. It's a gift.
It is.
We're designed, we're known, we're loved.
And it's not about striving for some unattainable perfection, but embracing who we are, limits and all. It's about embracing our creatureliness.
And that actually reminds me of another point the lecture made. It's not just about what we think or believe. It's about what we actually do. Our physical actions, our choices, they have an impact on our spiritual growth.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
We can't just check out of our physical existence and become these disembodied spirits. Our bodies are part of who we are, and how we treat them, how we use them, it matters.
You know that saying, you are what you eat? Well, maybe it's more like you are what you do. You are how you move through the world.
Exactly. And that's where virtue comes in.
Yeah.
The lectures really emphasize how our physical actions, those everyday choices, can actually help us grow spiritually.
It's not just about avoiding the bad stuff.
Right. It's about actively choosing good, pursuing things that are true and beautiful and life-giving.
So our actions actually become part of those imprints we were talking about earlier.
Yes. They shape us, not just externally, but internally.
It's like this ripple effect.
Exactly. And
Right.
think about it. Those ripples, they don't just affect us, they affect our families, our communities, the world around us.
So it's about more than just our own personal growth.
Way more.
It's like we're accountable to something bigger.
It is.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that we're a part of something so much bigger than ourselves.
It's that story.
A story that's been unfolding since the beginning of time.
Which takes us right back to that idea of narrative identity.
Right.
We talked about it earlier.
Yeah.
It's not just about us finding our place in the world.
It's about recognizing that we already have a place.
We have a place in a much bigger story.
And a story that's still being written.
It's humbling.
It is humble.
And kind of empowering at the same time, right? To think that we're not just writing our own little story.
We're part of something much bigger.
We're characters in this huge narrative
A divine drama.
with stakes higher than we can even imagine.
Absolutely.
It really makes you think twice about the choices we make,
Right.
about those everyday actions. It's like every little decision.
It all matters.
It all contributes to the plot somehow.
It really does. And here's the amazing thing. Even with all our flaws, even with those moments when we mess up, when we doubt,
Those plot twists.
God can still use our stories for good.
He can work with those imperfections.
He can take those messy chapters and weave them into something beautiful.
Something redemptive. That's a comforting thought,
It is.
especially on those days when you feel like you've really messed things up.
We've all been there.
It's like even our failures,
Yeah,
they can become part of the story too.
absolutely. The lectures make a really important point about this. They remind us that our tendency to make mistakes.
That creaturely part of us.
Yes. That's not the end of our story.
There's more.
There's always more. We have a Redeemer,
We do.
and it's in him that we find our true identity.
It's like that verse.
Which one?
You know, the one from Romans, where Paul says, "For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord."
What a powerful reminder.
Right. We're held by this love,
Embraced by a love that's bigger than we can even comprehend.
a love that doesn't require us to be perfect.
We don't have to have it all figured out.
It meets us right where we are,
Yes. And invites us to go deeper.
to become more fully ourselves.
Flaws and all.
Which, let's be honest, that's a lifelong journey.
Absolutely. It's a process.
Always room for growth.
Always transforming.
And that's where the adventure is, right?
It is. It's in those moments when we surrender, when we say yes to God's invitation, that we truly discover what it means to be human.
What it means to be fully alive. So if you're listening and you're still wrestling with that question, who am I really?
It's a big one.
It is a big one. I hope this deep dive has given you some new things to think about,
Some fresh perspectives.
some new paths to explore.
Yes. Maybe this has sparked a curiosity to dig into those ancient stories.
To look at your own story in a new light,
To listen for that still, small voice whispering your name.
inviting you deeper
Deeper into the heart of God.
deeper into your own heart.
Into the heart of your own story.
To remember that you are not just a random collection of cells and experiences.
You are so much more.
You are a masterpiece,
A masterpiece in progress.
fearfully and wonderfully made,
With a purpose.
with a unique and irreplaceable role to play
In this grand narrative
of creation.
of redemption.
And that
That is something worth celebrating.